Hi, I'm Celia Wexler, President of the Society of Professional Journalists DC Pro Chapter. With me today is Kate Woodsome, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist whose dedication to her work covering conflicts across the globe, including the January 6th insurrection, nearly cost her her health and sense of well being. In the life changing decisions she made 5 years ago, Woodsome learned not only how to heal herself, but also how to protect the mental health of all journalists and to see ways journalism could be practiced to heal our broken democracy. She reports, writes, and strategizes at the intersection of trauma, democracy, and collective well being. As the founder of the Invisible Threads Impact Lab and a visiting scholar at Georgetown University's Psychology Department, her work examines how systems, policies, and information shape our sense of belonging, decision making, and capacity to act. By revealing the connections between mental health and democratic health, she strives to help leaders, teams, and communities strengthen both. Her Substack is called Invisible Threads. Kate also is the creator of regenerative journalism, an approach to reporting that heals not only journalists, but also the body politic. Kate, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. You were a journalist for more than 2 decades, working in some of the most dangerous places on earth. What drew you to this beat, and what kept you going as a reporter? What did you cover and where?
It's a very personal profession for me. It is rooted in my family's own intergenerational trauma. And I grew up in a very volatile home, that was unsafe for me. And I always wanted someone to ask me, what do you need to feel safe? And so I decided that when I had the power and privilege to go into the world, I would ask the same question of others. Um, so I began looking at the connections between trauma, democracy, authoritarianism, what happens after societies experience war, genocide, and other ruptures, and and what is it that occurs that people can take advantage of people's pain in order to seek power, profit, or influence. So I do want to fact check. I don't go into active war zones. And there are many of my journalist colleagues who have been reporting from Gaza or Ukraine who would probably scoff at saying that I've covered the most dangerous places in the world. I generally go into societies that are post-conflict, post-genocide, post-rupture. And from Cuba to Cambodia to Hong Kong, South Sudan, and of course, the US Capitol on January 6th.
Tell me what happened on January 6th that changed you so dramatically. And was that indeed the most dangerous place, Washington, D.C., that you covered?
You know, it's interesting. Throughout my career, a press badge is generally a protective force. And in addition to that, my identity as a white woman with a blue passport, an American passport around the world, has been a way to navigate situations with relative safety. Um, and what was fascinating about January 6th is that it was my press badge and my identity as a journalist for the Washington Post that made me a target for members of the mob. And I was on the back side of the Capitol. The rioters had already breached the Capitol. They were inside, of course, battling with police and dodging flashbang grenades and tear gas and inside, a Capitol police officer shot and fatally shot Ashley Babbitt, who was a woman who had attacked the Capitol in support of Trump. And word spread of her shooting. And when I was outside, I was waiting to do a hit for the Washington Post, a news hit for the Washington Post. So I was writing notes on my notebook and I was wearing a bulletproof vest and I had a colleague who was filming with me, and a man saw me in my bulletproof vest with my, press badge and notebook and said, "Who do you work for?" And I said, "The Washington Post," because it's historically customary to identify yourself, and that lit him up, where he surged at me and screamed, "The Washington Post, you should be ashamed of yourself. A lady died because of your lies." And he was so intoxicated by misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and the belief, he really believed that the election had been stolen. And he felt that the media had undermined democracy and was part of creating the conditions for Ashley Babbitt to die. So um, he swarmed, and when he started yelling, others swarmed, and it was essentially like, flies to honey, where people were yelling vermin and traitor and enemy of the people. And I think what's really interesting about the moment is that, you know, you're all of us have nervous systems. Our nervous system is made up of our brain stem, and the nerves throughout our body that are constantly scanning for information in order to see if we are safe, in order to keep us alive. And so my nervous system was scanning the moment, trying to assess, are you safe in this moment? And it clearly said danger, danger. But what it does is your nervous system takes in information that is immediately around you, compares it to past experiences, and kind of reconciles what you're going to do in the moment. And so even though I wanted to book it out of there, I wanted to like lash out and scream back, I just stayed really still, and I used compassionate curiosity, and I showed empathy and concern for what these people who were threatening me were experiencing. And so I just nodded and showed that I was listening really intently. And when I wasn't giving more fuel to the fire, there was enough of a pause for me to ask, what upsets you most? What's really concerning you? And there was the regular, like, this is a stolen election, this is rigged, this is deep state. But one woman said, the media is dividing us, it's pitting us against each other, it looks down on us. And this is a refrain I had frequently heard from Trump supporters, that they felt the media looked down on them. Um, and so that's a very human experience, to feel degraded and to feel like someone doesn't get you. And so I knew that, just for my own survival, but also on a human level, it was important to show that I was respecting them in a way. And so I listened, and I think I asked a couple other questions. And then at one point, this guy, once he realized that I wasn't like the enemy of the people, that I was just this lady, he said, "Hey, lady, you should be with us. You're a middle-aged white lady. You should be with us, not with Antifa." And I turned to him and I said, "What about me says middle-aged?" And it was that joke about my age that kind of broke the trance, where this guy got embarrassed that maybe he'd offended me, and the people around laughed. And in seeing my humanity, they reconnected with theirs. So I was able to move out of it. And there's video of it. I look really calm. I handled it really well. I went on to do, the news hit for the Washington Post. I went on to cover this on Morning Joe and Indian television, and, wrote op-eds and produced videos, and just worked harder than I ever have before. And that adrenaline masked the neurophysiological injury that I had suffered. I had suffered trauma and I didn't realize it.
So when did it come crashing down on you? I mean, you did great work. You were part of a Pulitzer winning team, a very important part of that team. And um, when was it that you just felt this is not working for me anymore? Because it seems as if you had good idea of what to do when you're in danger, but that wasn't enough. That
Yeah,
strategy wasn't enough.
here's the thing. When when a team is successful, we say it's a team effort, right? But when something goes wrong, we'll look at what was wrong with the person or what happened in that individual incident. And so, what I've learned is that we need to build systems and structures and processes and procedures in newsrooms or any other environment where you are in regular contact with adversity, whether your own or other people's. We need to put systems in place that don't leave people burned out, overworked, under-resourced. And that's what happened to me. So I have since realized that how well a person recovers from trauma the day after often reflects how well they were doing the day before
Uh,
and the resources and care that they get in the days, months, weeks following. And so think about 2020. Um, 2020, 2021. Pandemic, racial justice protests, the election, the insurrection, then the inauguration. One thing after another, after another, after another. When people talk about the pandemic and how they learned to bake bread and commune with their friends, it was like, I don't know when you have time to break bread because we were working harder than ever. So I was totally burnt out. My team had been cut. There was reallocation of resources. I was in the opinions section working with a very, very, very tiny team that was cut even more. And we were separated from the main news video team. So even our structures of support weren't there and the lines of communication weren't strong. And so going into it, the Washington Post handed out bulletproof vests and helmets to everybody to cover this thing, but there wasn't a holistic view of how much sleep do you have? Who is, helping you in this moment? What led up to it? Are there hairline fractures in your team because of being overstretched? And so those hairline fractures, when you have a traumatic event, can explode open into like a trauma tsunami. And that image is from Bruce Shapiro, who's the head of what was the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, is now the Global Center for Journalism
yeah.
and Trauma. So what happened is essentially the adrenaline wore off, and my brain and body began really showing the signs of having experienced too much stress that my nervous system couldn't cope with. And and that was a product of insufficient resources. It was a product of confused chains of command within the newsroom. It was a product of me being both a player coach. So I had been a manager, but when we had a reduction in staff, I went back into the field. And so there is confusion with that in my team, which can cause stress in new ways. And so the whole thing culminated in um, me and team members collapsing essentially under the weight of the stress. Um, and then, as I began to work on my own healing, I really began analyzing how the system I was in and the system I dedicated my life to was not built for the well-being of the people holding it together.
As you got to that point when you were in a point of burnout and not feeling good, um, and making decisions about whether to stay or leave, did your journalism and what was happening to you and how you came up with this very cogent analysis of what was wrong in the newsroom, did you use your journalism skills to investigate what was wrong and how to get things, how to get yourself better and the world a little better?
Yeah, I did. So, um, What I've realized in crisis that is that you really have to focus if you don't want to perpetuate harm, if you don't, there's this common phrase, hurt people hurt people. And very often, these hurt people are not intending to hurt others, but they don't have the resources and care to get grounded and to channel their energy in a constructive way. And so, I began recognizing that when trauma rips away your sense of control, there is a desperate need and desire to get control back. And so I was working really hard to establish, better safety control procedures and communication procedures, and to make sure that we weren't considered disabled by the capital attack, but also not taking the time to recover. So, what I realized over time is that I had to focus on my own healing and well-being. I had been focused on healing democracy, saving democracy, and I had to reorient to focus for a while on healing myself. Um, and then I started to look at, what are the resources, what are the processes in the newsroom, and everybody needs different things. So some people will need to take time off immediately. Other people will be so vibrating with adrenaline that taking time off is feels like a death sentence, and they'll need to take time off later when they crash, right? So I began to notice like what is our system, and the newsroom sent around information from the Dart Center about trauma. But so much of the information around trauma is cerebral. It's like, how do we, how can we think our way through this? When really what I believe we need to be doing is learning how to read our stress responses in our nervous system so we can begin to notice when we're nearing burnout or we're nearing collapse. Um,
That's really important in this through this year. I mean, when you think of all the reporters that are called names every day, um, and I wonder, as you try, as your philosophy now is very much, you're a scholar, a visiting scholar at Georgetown. So how did you reach out? I mean, it was clear that you went to experts beyond journalism to try to figure out what was happening to your body
yeah.
and how it could heal. So talk to me about that process, that exploration.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think the Post did well, if imperfectly, was on the advice of Bruce Shapiro. He said that after you've experienced a traumatic event, it helps to change your assignment so that you're not constantly revisiting the dynamics of the thing that hurt you. And so I essentially switched my beat, and began focusing on individual and collective health and mental health in society. And so in my reporting, I began to do the stories to help me understand what was happening inside me, which I also began to recognize reflected wider patterns in communities and the country. Um, and so when I was one of the folks, there was hundreds of people who were offered a buyout in 2023, late 2023. It was the first round of this era of buyouts in the post um, changing landscape. And as it was optional, and as I began to think about, do I want to stay or do I want to go, I began to reach out to different people, literally like Googling mental health and democracy, individual and collective well-being, and like who is doing this work? What is the language? Like I didn't even have the vocabulary of some of the stuff. And I started having coffees, Zooms with people to say, I've been in newsrooms for my entire career. I don't even know what the world is like out there, but I know that this is the work I want to do, and I want to understand how you do it. And so I had an early conversation with Randall Bass, the director of Georgetown University's Red House, which is a research and design unit. And they were working on a really big project around intergenerational well-being. And he ended up inviting me to become a fellow and work with them on the development of we call it a systems change framework, to help identify where cycles of harm are in motion, where and why are people hurting people, what can we do to intervene, disrupt, and reorient so that we can have cycles of healing and well-being. So when I took the buyout, I took little time off and then I started working with the Red House on this framework.
And when you talk, you talk a lot about the connection between political dysfunction and the dysfunction we feel in our bodies. How does that manifest itself? And what's your advice to journalists? I mean, you've written about this some. You have invisible threads. Your Substack, and why is it called Invisible Threads? As an
Yeah,
aside.
I call it invisible threads because I look at the connections between mental health and
Ah,
democracy.
yes.
And the invisible threads are often what connect all of us, which is stress, a desire to feel better. But really, what I think of it, a healthy democracy, it depends on the health of our relationships with ourselves and the health of our relationships with other people. And what are the forces and factors that either support that health or get in its way? And so these are the invisible threads that when we talk about this democratic crisis or political division, and everybody's saying, how did we get here? My answer is collective trauma. And let me explain what trauma is. It is a neurophysiological wound. So it's not just something in your head, it is a wound that takes place when you have experienced something that is too intense or too prolonged for your nervous system to process. So again, your nervous system is it takes in stress, it takes in information, and it metabolizes it. It tells your lungs to pump, your heart to pump, your lungs to breathe, your muscles to move. And we move or we shrink or we relax or we get activated in order to respond to the threats around us. But when a overwhelmingly distressing event happens, our nervous system and its messages to the body becomes overwhelmed, essentially short circuits. So the parts of the brain that are related to fear, that are related to memory and processing and critical thinking, the parts of the brain that help us understand the difference between the past, the present, and the future, this information circuitry gets short-circuited. The information gets jostled essentially when you have a traumatic, overwhelming event. And so you actually feel, for example, if I heard a large car backfire on the street today, my brain might say that is the flashbang grenade I heard at the Capitol, where the currents in our brain are confused about past and present. And what happens is then a person stays in a hypervigilant state, scanning for danger all the time.
Yeah. Now you really have also you have created something called regenerative journalism. And that assumes that journalism as we practice it is not helping things
Yeah.
necessarily, not helping the journalist and not helping the people we serve. So tell me about that. What is regenerative journalism and how is it different from, you know, your ordinary
You're
journalism,
regular.
your regular,
So,
yeah.
so to go first on this understanding, stress activation and trauma, if you're already in a heightened state of stress and you're scanning for danger, the ideal is that you're able to come back to balance, that you have enough safety, resources, and time to heal. But if you are facing unrelenting adversity, whether it is poverty or racism or political violence, or if you are constantly consuming information that is distressing with graphic imagery, with political rhetoric that is extremely violent, with watching ICE raids unfold.
Yeah.
Um, that information in your hand, which is disseminated by social media platforms that know how to addict you and how to grip you so that you continue watching, we can never settle. Our nervous systems cannot reset. We're caught, we're caught in constant states of activation. So, um, I'm going to do the big picture here. So, when you look at it's not just an individual problem, it's our systems from our media system, our political system, our economic system, keeping us in these activated states of fight, flight, freeze, and overwhelm, right? Um, that maps out onto communities. And so if you're scanning for danger and you're activated, you begin to think of us versus them. You begin to get more polarized. And when you're more polarized, exhausted, and overwhelmed, authoritarian leaders can come in, abuse their power, keep you divided, and keep you tired. So, what does regenerative journalism have to do with this? Um, it is designed essentially to leave the civic soil healthier than we found it. And I build in nervous system literacy into the media so that each piece of journalism comes with an explanation that information itself can be activating, right? And it helps people understand and begin to ask a series of questions so that they notice how is their body responding to the information so that the information itself is almost like a guide to being more grounded. So you go in with information to get more grounded, which is understanding your stress state. And then instead of just looking at the surface level, um, reactive, clickbaity information, regenerative journalism looks at the roots of the causes of our political distress or our social division. So none of this starts out of nowhere. You have to go upstream to understand the dynamics that created these conditions. So, nervous system literacy to help you understand your stress, the roots of our problems to help you get the context of where this came from. Then you need paths to repair. You need to be able to see that there is a way through this. And where this is different than other journalism or solutions journalism is it actually builds in examples of what people can do on an individual, communal, and systemic level. So it's not, I'm not telling people specifically what to do. I'm showing that change happens on different levels and they need to decide what their role in the civic health and personal health is. So the point of the regenerative is a lot of information just activates you, leaves you overwhelmed and helpless, right? But this is empowering you with the skills to build your resilience, the information to better understand the roots and drivers of this pain, and then the paths that you choose that work for you and your communities to help heal it.
I wanted to look at examples. I know you were in Charlottesville for the No Kings rally. How did you prepare, and how was your journalism regenerative when you covered that?
So, it's I'm going to pivot. An even better example, I think, of this is when I covered the military parade that
Okay,
Trump had
sure.
for the birthday of the military. So when I went, I live streamed this military parade. In preparation, I had gone down and surveyed the streets, so I was aware of what was happening and the security and who were the different players, and I mapped out where is my route to leave, etc. But then when I was live streaming, I helped explain to viewers what was happening within my own nervous system, saying that, I am a journalist reporting on this, but I'm also a human who the last time I was around a group um, of supporters of the president, many of them were hostile to me. And so I explained that even though I was not in direct threat in that moment, my nervous system was braced for confrontation. And so I named that, I explained what I was feeling, and then I explained to people I need to take a breath here, I need to pull back. When I was engaged in a conversation with a gentleman that got tense, he was trying to essentially, he was defending some policies, including the January 6th attack and diminishing the significance of it. He was getting really revved up, and then I was getting really stressed. And I asked him in the moment, "What are you experiencing stress right now?" And he was taken aback and he said, "Why do you say that?" And I said, "Because I notice your voice is rising and you're getting more animated. And I just wondered if you feel more stressed." And he said, "But do you feel stressed?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And when I said, "Yes, I do," he was like, "I guess probably I do feel a bit agitated." And I said, "Okay, so let's start from there. We both feel a little stressed and we're trying to connect, but this is hard in the moment." And all of a sudden in him, that shifted him, where he became more aware of his body, he became more aware of his mind, and then he became aware that I was a person too. And from there, he de-escalated himself and started the conversation again from a more grounded state. Um, so that I took that, I went after that, I was live streaming and I explained to people that I got really activated because even though I wasn't in direct threat, that kind of energy reminds me of when I was under threat. And so I had to regroup and reset. Journalists maybe do this. I think it needs to become more normal. I think we check our gear and our questions more often than we check our nervous system. And if you learn the resilience skills to notice when you're getting overwhelmed, then you can actually do something to reset so that you don't just dive into the next crisis because vibrating with energy feels normal.
So is that, I'm thinking of a print reporter, and we have many people who cover many traumatic events all the time, um, and try to talk to people who are hostile to them. I'm I'm sensing that ideally reporters would take more risks essentially by saying to somebody else, by not just writing down words, that the first words that come out of somebody's mouth, but trying to understand what is going on with them as we share what is going on with us, which is risky. It's not
Yeah.
something reporters know how to do.
I
Reporters are always told, you're not part of the story, and just and also they're told basically to get the most incendiary quote, you
Yeah,
know?
I think in that you just nailed it. I think that's the problem. So, number one, we're gaslighting ourselves that when we say we're not part of the story, yeah, we are not the lead in the story, but our personal experience affects the questions we ask, our stress levels affects the tone of our voice, how fast we're charging ahead at a press conference, whether or not we notice that the person in front of us who's been through a school shooting is getting totally flooded and overwhelmed. So our experience affects every part of the story. So while we are not the subject of it, we are, the conductor that changes the subject matter. So that's number one. And I think that, this facade of um, objectivity and neutrality is hurting us because what it says is that your well-being doesn't affect your subjects or the choices that you're making, and therefore your subjects and the experiences that you're witnessing and in the middle of don't affect your well-being. It erases the journalist. So there is a way to do objective reporting, but still recognize that we are affected by it and we affect it. The other part of that is, the more I learn about trauma and have now been interviewed by journalists who are totally not trauma informed, and I know that most of us think that telling stories is a cathartic healing process, and I think it is. Bruce Shapiro said, when trauma rips away your sense of control, one of the only things you have control over is your story. And that is true. And so we often think we are the shepherds to help somebody through their pain by giving them voice. If you don't know trauma and you can't recognize people's stress responses, asking someone to retell their story when they're already really activated or when they're in a freeze state. So if you're numbed out in order to protect yourself from the feelings that are too overwhelming and you start telling your story, your nervous system can get overwhelmed and we can cause real, real, real harm. We can re-traumatize people. And I'm just over that. I'm just really done. Like we are unintentionally perpetuating harm. Yeah.
How do you, I mean, that's a big thing because we've all, as journalists, probably spoken to victims of various tragedies, and what are we asking people? How do you feel? And what you're saying is basically be be aware of where that person is and their health, their mental health. But then that's essentially that's a revolution.
It's a revolution. And here's the thing. We talk about trauma-informed journalism, which is excellent. And if anything is trauma-informed, you leave people resources to get help. So it's not just the framing of your questions, it's that we are extracting their most personal information and then leaving them behind to deal with it on their own. That doesn't mean we continue to be their counselors, but it means that before going into a community, our editors and our journalists, there should be someone in the newsroom that is looking at that community and figuring out what the resources are and putting it on an information sheet and handing it to the person. I mean, that is revolutionary. It is an intervention that some would say is not our role, but I would say we are already intervening and we pretend that there aren't ripples to every footstep we take, but there are. And so why can't the ripples be regenerative?
So I wanted to ask you, you also covered the Epstein survivors press conference. And was your approach, how was that your approach to that?
So one thing that was so interesting about that, this was a press conference on the backside of the Capitol, and I hadn't been to a scrum like that in a while. And it was the first major gathering of Epstein survivors at the Capitol. And so people really wanted to get their shot, obviously, to get their questions in. And I saw the scrum of journalists in a way that I hadn't when I was like really deep in it. They were so almost rabid, where like I was standing next to a photographer who was upset that this young reporter was crouching in front of him, and he kicked her with his foot and said, "Get out of the way." And then she turned around upset and said, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "I've been here." And then another journalist was asking a question, and another journalist spoke over her, and she turned and snarled at him and said, "I was first." And it's like, this is the industry. We romanticize this,
Yeah,
right?
we do.
Um, but if you took a step back and analyzed what was happening, you have people in very heightened states who are really only looking out for themselves, and their shot and their company. And probably wouldn't treat other people the way they had just treated a colleague in that way. It was like bonkers to see once I was out of it. So, how did I cover it? I really focused on the, so yeah, I focused on the humanity of the survivors and their request to be seen as people. And one of the points that they were making is that every time there is focus on a conspiracy theory or denial or outright lies about what Epstein did by people in power, Trump included, that dehumanizes the women that suffered these harms. And so the approach to writing was to center their humanity and help to point out the dynamics of what happens within abuse of power. Um, the live stream was me helping to connect the dots between um, political power and personal power.
And what are the dots between political power and personal power?
Well, if you look at healthy relationships or abusive relationships, let's go for abusive relationships. They're all about power and control. And in order to maintain power and control, an abuser will deprive their victim of financial resources, they will deprive them of information, and they will deprive them of connection to other people. And so this is, well documented within domestic violence situations, and it is very similar to the situation we're seeing right now, for example, between the administration's attack on the free press and journalism, where they are denying an attack on academia, an attack on researchers. We're denying access, information, and resources. And this is an effort to obtain and maintain power and control. So when I think about the invisible threads, it's recognizing that our systems, our political systems, are made up of people. And the same dynamics that we have within ourselves and within our families and within our communities are echoed in our policies and practices and cultures.
So it begins for you. So tell me about your start at the start of a new year, a 5-year anniversary of January 6th. How are you going to market?
Well, one, I'm hoping to get an op-ed in a good publication. I just filed, and I'm like so frustrated with myself for procrastinating because I've known this has been coming forever. But apart from that, if I just look at my own humanity, um, I think I'll go into Rock Creek Park and throw a stone in the river, um, into the creek to recognize all I've lost and all I've gained, and truly because of the choice I made to take that crack in my safety. I made a choice to really focus on my own personal healing and to recognize how a lifetime of trying to outrun adversity put me in a position where I was recreating the same scarcity, fear, and adrenaline that made me feel unsafe in the first place. And so the healing I've done over the past 5 years has, I'm so much happier. I'm so much healthier. I'm in a beautiful, loving relationship. I'm doing work that's aligned with my values, and I'm working on something that has, I think, if we get the right resources behind it, it really has a role to play in disrupting our intergenerational trauma. I mean, the other fact that we don't think about when we say hurt people, or hurt people build broken systems, and broken systems hurt people. It's that healed people build healthy systems, and healthy people heal people. And so, healthy, healed people build healthy systems, and healthy systems heal people. So, if we have the media, if we have the tools, and we have the strategies, we can actually reorient and get out of this mess. It'll last longer than we're alive, but the joy of this January 5th anniversary is that I'm on the path to living that.
Kate, is there anything else that you'd like to say to your audience of journalists today?
Yeah, I talk to so many journalists and Capitol Hill staffers who are told that this story is not about them, are told that, you know, if you didn't suffer a physical injury, then nothing's wrong. And um, we can't keep gaslighting ourselves and each other. Um, we might not be the subject of the story, but we are affected by it and we affect it. And until we honor that our brain and body and our relationships and our very being is affected by what we put ourselves into every day, we're dehumanizing ourselves. And when we dehumanize ourselves, it's much easier to dehumanize others.
That's, I think, a good way for us to conclude this interview. And I really appreciate your coming on and explaining this. And we will have this, I'm sure, on our website. But what is the address? How can people find you?
Thank you. The Substack is katewoodsome.substack.com. Woodsome is Woodsome. And the work we're doing is invisiblethreadslab.com.
Invisiblethreadslab.com. Okay, so we know how to find you.
Yeah,
I hope you have a good holiday, and I'm glad to see you looking so well. Thank you very much for being here.
I'm so grateful to you, Celia. You're a special person. Thank you.